Hello everyone. I don't know why, but my computer's camera doesn't work right now. So I just decide to take the video like this way. I cannot show my face, but I think you can see on the screen what is going on, right? So let's start our discussion on several issues first. The first of all, I want to emphasize the development of state versus mutual hostage by David Kahn. I wanted to definitely ask the questions related to development of state versus mutual hostage situation. And the second thing is developmental state. And let me see. So I want to discuss first of all, developmental state versus mutual hostage. Let's see if you want to focus on development state, so we have learned the balance of power, the power configuration among three different sectors: labor, state, and business. So we will focus on that. And then mutual hostage, you should focus on political aspect versus business aspect. So let's just start our discussion. The crony capitalism, you should definitely know what is crony capitalism is, and then what's the difference between the development state and the crony capitalism. So mutual hostage situation is neither political nor economic elites could take excessive advantage of the other. But if you think of development states, traditional development states argument is that the government has a lot of power and the business didn't have any power, and the business was just a delegate of what government said. So in terms of power configuration, according to traditional development states, government has a lot of power, but not economic power, but not economic sector. But David Gang actually criticized that situation, right? They say there was a mutual hostage situation among political elites and economy elites. The balance of power allowed elites to collude, limited the chance for excessive rent seeking that might swamp economic growth. The government intervention into the economy was constrained by the business sector that reduced both rent seeking on the part of entrepreneurs and transaction costs for politicians and bureaucrats involved in monitoring the policy process. Let me explain more on this slide. I know this is just one slide, but if you recall what we have learned, I just don't want to show a lot of slides because it's unfair for students who came to class every session. So that's why many of them took a picture of it, and then that's why I don't want to show a lot of slide like this. But I want to explain this. First of all, so why the politics they want to they were in the mutual hostage situation is because they need the money. They need political money from the business. Why is that? It's because at the time it was dictatorships, and then they prioritized the economic growth as the first goal for the developed to justify their power. To maintain their power, they always need the money because they use a lot of money for the to oppress opposition. So if you recall, I actually show a lot of video how and why the politicians need the money, and then how they oppress the opposition, and they have to spend a lot of money for that, and because of that they need the money, and where this money come from, it's from business. That's why they couldn't they use their power overly to the economy elites. And at the same time, from the bureaucrats perspective, they want to succeed economic growth, economic project. If there is economic project, they want to certainly um, succeed that project. So I mean, the choice they have is when they select the business which implement their policy, they usually tend to select big firms like that. So that's why the Korea has a lot of big conglomerate like that, if you remember. And then from that perspective, so David Gang argues that business has also power of that. And from bureaucrats' perspective, the bureaucrats also they wanted to have safe job after they finish their work. So like they were civil servant, and then if they become like 65, if they're retired, then they wanted to have a job. And then where this job come from? It's usually big firms. So usually big firms they offer to the civil servant, retired civil servant to use the connection to the government. So at the time, if you have a connection to the government, it's more useful, right? So the business and the bureaucrats, they have this kind of connections. And using this connection, the business gets a lot, favor by the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats uh, are inclined to select these big firms for their safety, job safety. At the same time, they wanted to succeed their project. Because of this situation, they call this mutual hostage situation. So neither political nor economic allies could take the excess advantage of the other. And at the same time, the government intervention on the economy was constrained by the business sector. So if business doesn't want, the government cannot push more, right? And then that actually works to reduce both rent seeking on the part of entrepreneurs and transaction cost for the politician and bureaucrats. So I explained that like government started to a certain business, let's say, and then what they should do is monitor, right, and monitor whether this business are doing well or not. But if they use these kind of connections, they could save a transaction cost at least for the monitor. They don't have to monitor anymore because uh, they already have this kind of connection. And this actually works for even though there is high corruption. So even though when we start with David Gang, it starts with money politics first. So if there is corruption, then usually people think that it doesn't really help for economic growth. But South Korean case was exceptional. And then why is that? It's because of this. And then this reduced both rent-seeking behavior. Of course, there was rent-seeking behavior by politicians because they needed money. So the government, the business actually bribed a lot to the politics, and in return, so they got favored. So they have a right to have a trade, or they could be selected for like import or export goods. So they could produce export good like that, or they got favored by tax breaks or other things. There was this kind of corruptions, but it didn't go too much to harm the economy as a whole. And then they could save the money, transaction costs money, because they don't need to monitor this business anymore. And that's the one thing about Tevka. And I wanted to emphasize how South Korea achieved democracy, but China, why the Chinese economy retarded democracy. So I wanted to emphasize this a lot because, this is final. So I wanted to emphasize why China, even though it achieved a certain level of economic development, but they couldn't achieve democracy. That's very important. Since 1978, China's started to economic reform, so they opened their economy to foreign investment and trade. The most important thing that China focused on was role of FDI. So China has attracted more FDI than any other developing country. And then why China was so obsessed with this FDI, the attraction of FDI, is because after the revolution, so China had several revolutions. The first one, the Great Reform Movement, and second one, Chinese Cultural Revolution, and both of them failed, right? So a lot of people were killed and died. And at the time, there was no money, and they do not have any technology, and they do not have any modern industrial equipment, and they do not have any managerial know-how. And because of this, had to they had to depend on heavily on FDI. So that's why they attract a lot of FDI. So in 1990s, they attract about $234 billion. Russia, if you compare other countries, this amount is a lot. And abnormality was many foreign direct investment. When they decide to invest, they think about the risk and property rights and stable institutional setting and clear chance for profit. In China, they don't have this kind of, they had a lot of risks because it's a new government and it was the communist government and there was no clear property right guidance and there was no stable institutional setting and there was no clear chance for profits. Although despite all these risks, the people still have investment, and we should focus on why they succeed and why they could and how they could accept how they could attract this so many FDI, and that's what we should focus on, right? Uh, FDI, so I explained that they could succeed to attract a lot of FDI because the local governments, role of local government, and they compete each other. And oh, I didn't put in here. I thought I did. Anyway, so let me explain uh, like this. So local government they fight each other. They compete for FDI, and then as I explained at first, the opening to the world market was only for coastal area first, and they succeeded, and then this success actually expanded to inland as well. And this government actually fight for like we could do land, we could do borrow free land, or we could provide tax incentives, or we could provide infrastructure for your firm. And because of that reasons, many foreign direct investment actually started to invest in China. Um, and also, when I talked about China, I talked about how they could overcome the uh, in terms of the structure and agent problem. So when central government wanted to implement a certain policy, how we will make the local government follow as central government said. And then I explained what was the carrot, right, for local government. If they always select top three leaders who attract FDI the most, and then they have a chance to promote or they got benefit out of it. So that's how they solve the select structure and agent problem. And I wanted to focus on, but why China could not become democracy, but South Korea achieved democracy, right? The main reason is that whether the development of domestic farms or not. So South Korean case, if you look at it, depending, I mean, we developed it based on the domestic farms, not an FDI. So of course we need the money, but we need money. We got the money from like Vietnamese wars or the Japanese money, and that's how we make money first, or the U.S. But Chinese case, they started to develop the FDI, but not domestic farms. And Korea, since we focus on the development of domestic farms, and then the balance of power has been changed. That means at first, state had more power. Of course, David Gang doesn't think like that way, but later on, the firm has more power later on, and then labor. Labor didn't have any power before, but after the domestic firm has been grown, to, labor also has a lot of power. And this labor, this means actually the growth of middle class. The growth of middle class actually lead to the democracy. So people wanted to have a democracy after they achieved high level of economic growth. But China's case, the growth led by FDI, not the state. So business and state leader are incontested. So that means, I mean, the FDI, actually the state could not control the FDI. And then since the domestic farms and private farms are not allowed to grow much, as we have learned, so FDI are not interested in democracy and kind of things. So because the China developed it on based on the FDI, it's not developed the private farms. So this actually lead to resistance for democracy. And here actually shows how state-owned the state entrepreneurs or private firms could not grow well, right? So there was informal bureaucratic discrimination. So like for private firms, they are not allowed to access the foreign trade, right? So if you want to trade with foreign firms, you need to have a right for that. But the government actually banned on this trade, foreign trade, right? So that's why the private firms could not grow until 2000. And the Chinese state owned firm, they were really bad, right? So they actually just wanted to expand much, but they couldn't manage well because sometimes their owners are politically appointed. So they don't know what to do. So they decide sometimes horrible decision. And this actually ruined the state entrepreneurships. So that's why they couldn't grow up. And the this is the state owned 30% of the country's industrial growth, but receive over 70% of its loans. So this means actually this shows that the state-owned firm could not manage by themselves. That's why they couldn't grow well. That's why it also contribute to retard the democracy in China. And the FDI could success and expanded, but not state-owned firm and private firms. SOE and private firms delayed development, and then when they compete for the labor, the FDI firms only attract young and skilled labor, and then there are regulations on hiring, firing, terms of employment, non-benefits. Usually they got higher wage and welfare from the FDI firms, so they don't have to worry about like well-being, or they don't have to fight against like working condition kind of things, because these international firms, they pay more and they protect these welfare policies for them. So that's why they don't have to worry about it. So even though there was the growth of middle class in China, they don't have to really worry about this. But Korea case is different. In Japan, as I said, I'm not gonna ask the Japan, but if we, I strongly recommend to how to read my article if you wanted to know about like the Japanese case. But the most important thing, the key factor of miracle is MITI. So MITI as a central architect of Japanese industrial policy. So during the World War One, World War Two, the MITI controlled the military interests. That's how the MITI became the main uh, engine for the development. And then MITI's position after the war, they took this law and then they take care of the economic growth as a whole. That's how they become powerful. And then for a long time, they did the same thing as the Korea did. So, for instance, like they set up the goal, right? So what kind of product they wanted to produce. So that's what MITI did. And then I suggest four different their roles by government and state. And the first of all, I mean, you don't have to remember like Pathfinder kind of things, but so the one thing that I wanted to emphasize, two-tier pricing policy that Japan implemented for their economic growth. So they sell really cheap price to the foreign firms, but not to mass firms. So there is gap that um, to make benefits out of the product. They should sell a certain level, right? But they actually sell cheaper than a certain level. But that gaps actually fill out by selling the domestic in more expensive. That's their kind of strategy. So I think you kind of notice what I wanted to ask, right? So I'm pretty sure I'll ask David Gang, Mutual Asset Association, and then I'll ask uh, why Chinese development retarded democracy, and then I'm gonna ask how China developed it. So the development strategy comparing with Korea. I'm not sure whether I'll ask that, but I'll ask. So you should study David Gang article and traditional Korean development state article. And then you should study how China developed it and then why China retarded to democracy and then how China developed it. So five things. That's the five questions in my mind. So if you study that, you don't have to worry about the exam. So exam, I will post again. So exam is December 12th, and good luck. So